History has collected a surplus amount of the world's greatest speeches, told by the most influential individuals. These speakers are known to use their oratory skills and speeches in order to captivate their audience and get their point across. Marc Antony of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar delivered one of literature's greatest speeches. Through his speech, he is able to get the Romans to seek revenge on behalf of Caesar after convincing them that Caesar's death was truly unjust. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was another gifted spokesperson in history, in which many acknowledge that his presidential inaugural address was one of the best inaugural speeches of all time. In his address, Kennedy outlines the power and responsibilities of both himself and the citizens to ensure the hopeful future of the United States during the Cold War. In both Marc Antony's funeral speech and John F. Kennedy's presidential inaugural address, the speakers used the rhetorical devices, rhetorical questions, antithesis, and repetition to successfully attain their speech's purpose.
The first rhetorical device that made Marc Antony's funeral speech and John F. Kennedy's inaugural address successful was the use of rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are used when the speaker asks a question during his or her speech, but does not expect an answer. This device forces the audience to properly think about the question at hand instead of only listening to what the speaker is saying.
Marc Antony uses two rhetorical questions throughout his funeral speech in Julius Caesar. The first rhetorical question appears after he explains to the citizens about one of Caesar's good deeds, which was increasing the country's wealth when bringing captives to Rome. He asks the public,
"Did this in Caesar seem ambitious?"
This question is repeatedly asked throughout the speech.
The intention of asking this question was for the citizens to think about whether or not Brutus was correct in the fact that Caesar really was being ambitious. The ambitious question is pulled up again in Antony's speech using another example of Caesar's humility. After talking about how Caesar refused the crown, though being offered it 3 times, Antony asks,
"Was this ambition?"
Antony's audience understood that his points were correct due to the rhetorical questions asked. This made his speech successful, as the audience is able to take action instead of just listening to what was said.
In his inaugural address, President John F. Kennedy uses 2 rhetorical questions to further explain his purpose, similar to Antony and his speech. He asks his first rhetorical question when talking about the problems mankind has: tyranny, poverty, disease, and war.
Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind?
Here, Kennedy throws out a question to the audience asking if they can unite all together as a country to solve the problems for a better life. Straight after this question, he then asks,
Will you join in that historic effort?
Both of these quotes give the audience a patriotic feeling and encourage the bettering of mankind.
Using the rhetorical questions makes the audience want to help make mankind better, especially because they do not want to be left out in a historic movement, successfully achieving Kennedy's overall purpose in presenting his speech.
Another rhetorical device that allowed both Marc Antony's speech and John F. Kennedy's speech to achieve their purposes was the use of antithesis. Antithesis is used when 2 sentences of contrasting ideas are placed close together in writing and speeches, usually meant to highlight contrast.
Marc Antony uses antithesis throughout his funeral speech. The first example is in his introduction of the speech. He gains the attention of the citizens and says that he is going to talk about Caesar.
"The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones."
Here, he is contrasting how the evil of men are what is remembered and how the good is buried. With this, the citizens know that what Marc Antony is about to say is all good things about Caesar, which they did not get from Brutus, who in contrast said he was ambitious.
Towards the end, Antony uses another antithesis to strengthen his speech when he has said all the good things about Caesar.
"I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know.
Although it was not explicit, most of what Marc Antony is saying contrast each other, allowing him to highlight the fact that what Brutus had said was not all true. This ultimately leads to Antony's success.
Many antitheses are also used in President Kennedy's inaugural address to highlight what he wants to and does not want to achieve during his presidency. In the first sentence of his speech, he says,
Symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change.
This gives hope to the public and for the future of America. Although the words are complete opposite of each other, the words do not have a negative effect and instead express the idea of positive change more vividly.
Another antithesis that he uses that gives hope to the public is when he shares what he hopes to accomplish during his presidency. He says,
United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do.
By using the word united and divided, the public fully understands what they want, unification, and what they do not want, division.
He uses the terms of unification and division again when talking about America and other nations.
Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us.
By highlighting contrast between the good in unification and bad in division, the public can further understand that what John F. Kennedy was aiming for was unification.
One of Kennedy's most famous lines was an antithesis used in his inaugural address.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
These antitheses enable the public to become motivated to do something for the country, furthering the success of his speech. This ultimately was John F. Kennedy's goal, to involve all of the people in making mankind and America better.
The last rhetorical device that enabled Marc Antony and John F. Kennedy's speech to become successful was the use of repetition. Repetition is when a speaker repeats a word or phrase throughout the speech to make the point clear and stuck in the listener's head.
In Marc Antony's funeral speech, there are two main repeating phrase and word. Antony repeats the word ambition 7 times, often in the same context.
The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. But Brutus says he was ambitious. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When ambition should be made of sterner stuff, yet Brutus says he was ambitious. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And
By repeating the word ambition in a way that is the opposite of the real meaning, the citizens will understand that what Caesar was that he was not ambitious. Antony also repeatedly used the phrase,
and sure, he is an honorable man. And Brutus is an honorable man. And the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all. And Brutus is an honorable man.
Marc Antony repeats this phrase multiple times so that the citizens will think that he is not talking bad about Brutus, but by repeating this phrase, the citizens will think that Brutus is not an honorable man because of the reasons Antony gives implicitly.
In John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, Kennedy uses a type of repetition called anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of the first few words and makes it easier for the audience to know when an idea has changed. John F. Kennedy uses 2 anaphoras. The first anaphora is used when addressing specific groups of people.
He uses the phrase "to those" 4 times throughout his address. By repeating this phrase, the audience will understand who he is addressing to each time he is talking about a new idea. It makes it a successful speech because there is proper organization in the speech.
Another phrase he repeats that he uses at the start of his sentence is, by both sides, he is talking about America and other nations. With this phrase repeated, the audience will understand that his goal is to improve mankind by working with other nations. As rhetorical questions, antithesis and repetition are utilized in both speakers' speeches, Marc Antony and John F. Kennedy's speeches are successful in captivating their audience and enhancing their speeches.